But today I'm going to show you how to make this gouge jig.
Hi folks, we've got a treat for you today. We've got a guest video shot and edited by my dad, and he has been a lifelong woodworker, and lately he has been doing a lot of wood turning and consequently sharpening of chisels and gouges. He has started making homemade jigs to hold those chisels and gouges and to sharpen them more consistently. So check it out and let us know what you think. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jack. Welcome to my shop. I do a lot of woodworking and wood turning, so 2 months ago I decided to buy a whetstone sharpening system to help me with my sharpening needs. I bought a WEN sharpener, but lots of other companies make a similar machine. There's Tormek, Grizzly, Jet, Rikon, Harbor Freight, and others. The sharpener I bought came with just one jig. I decided to make my own jigs, not just because it's cheaper, but also because it's hard to get things like that here in Mexico. And I like to make things, and I'll be able to customize the jigs that I do make. This jig and all of the others will work on any sharpener that has a jig bar like this. I'll be making videos for at least 4 jigs, but today I'm going to show you how to make this gouge jig. At the end of the video, we'll talk about how to customize the jig. This is not a difficult jig to make, but it has a lot of steps, so we better get to it. Let's take a closer look at the jig. The jig is completely made of hardwood, and I wouldn't recommend using softwood for any of it, especially the parts that take threads. There's a lock nut on the back, and that allows it to be locked at angles so that you can sharpen v-chisels. The slider fits on the jig bar and allows the whole mechanism to slide back and forth over the stone. The angle can be set here and locked with this nut. This bolt holds the gouge in the jig. The first piece we're going to make is the slider. I'm using a 3/4 inch piece of ash, 2 3/8 inches wide and 12 inches long. I'm going to leave it 2 3/8 inches wide for now. I'll cut a 2.5 inch piece for the top of the slider and a 2 1/4 inch piece for the bottom of the slider. Okay, this is our prototype, and now we're going to make this piece here on the bottom, the one with the big hole that rides on the WEN shaft. In the description below, you'll find a link to some templates. I've taken one of those templates and glued it on here so I can locate this hole before I drill it on my lathe. Because I'm doing it on the lathe, I've left a little bit extra on this side so I can make sure I can get it nice and square when I do the drilling. Okay, now here's the other piece, which is this piece here, and that too has a template glued on it, and again I've kept the hole towards the center so I have some extra material here to bear on the chuck. Here's my lathe. These jaws are made for pen blanks, but they work pretty good with other pieces of small square wood. You just have to make sure they bear good on these two surfaces. I'm going to bring up my tailstock and fit it in there so that I get it nice and snug. Tighten it down and then tighten the jaws. This is the top of the slider, and it needs a 3/8 inch hole. You could drill these holes on a drill press, or even by hand, as long as you get the holes centered and square. Now I'll drill a 15/32 inch hole in the bottom piece. Measure the jig bar on your sharpener and adjust this size if needed. Now that we have the holes drilled, we can put the pattern on the side. Now with the top piece, make sure that this top line lines up there. And with the bottom piece, make sure that this line lines up with the curve there. Okay? Once we have that done, we can trim off this extra piece. Now I can cut the two pieces to their final width. Then I'll cut the diagonal on the top piece. Before I cut the diagonal on the bottom piece, I attach it to a piece of scrap wood. Now I can cut the two curves on the bottom piece. I've sanded all of the edges except the two diagonals, and now we'll glue these two pieces together. I'll sand the diagonals once the glue has dried. The next part we're going to make is the shaft. I'll be making this from a piece of eucalyptus. I've put on the template already for the top and for the end. The top one is offset by 1/2 inch because I'm going to use this piece of scrap afterwards, and I'll show you why later on. I've cut the piece square, and all the pieces that I'm going to drill on the lathe, I left them wide so they can bear on this surface. Now we need a 5/8 inch hole plus the 1/2 inch of the waste material, so we're going to need 1 1/8 inches depth on this hole, and I've marked that on my drill. So we're going to put it in here. Bring the drill point up and fit it in the hole that I've marked. That'll keep it centered. Now it's squared and centered, I can tighten it. Now we're going to drill a hole through this piece here. We're drilling a 5/16 hole, and we're going to tap it to 3/8 of an inch. I have my 3/8 inch tap chucked in the lathe. I find that with small pieces, it's better to have the tap fixed and rotate the piece around it. That way you can sight along the edge and make sure that the piece keeps perpendicular to the tap. One thing I like to do with wooden thread is to run some thin super glue into the threads, get them good and wet, and then let it dry. You don't want to use accelerator on this, you want the super glue to soak in. Once the super glue is dry, take your 3/8 inch tap and run it through one more time to clean out any extra super glue. The super glue will toughen the threads and make them last longer. Now we can trim the two sides. And now the end. Remember to save this piece. Now I put the side pattern on, and we're going to cut this cut here, then the curve, and then that cut there. Okay, now we're just going to sand off the paper and sand that edge and this part flat. Now we just need to clean up a little bit here with a file and finish sand it, and then we can glue this up. We're going to epoxy it in here, and then we're going to use this end here to support it. That way we know that it's perpendicular in this plane. We only have to check whether it's perpendicular in this plane. Okay? Here we go. Okay, now we just leave it to harden. A little bit of sanding and a little bit of linseed oil, and this piece is finished. Now we'll make the tool holder. For the tool holder, I'll be using this piece of ash, which is 3/4 of an inch thick and 2 1/4 inches wide and 6 inches long. The finished piece is only going to be 3 3/4 inches long, but I'm leaving some on here because I'm going to be cutting a mortise and I want some room to clamp it to my mortising jig. I pasted the template on the face of the piece, and I pasted part of the template on the side, just the part with the mortise. The part with the hole I'll save till later. Now I'll cut this slot on the table saw. Now I can cut out the triangular shape. I've drilled a 3/4 inch hole to give me room to maneuver the bandsaw blade. Make sure you stop the saw before you clear out the chips. Now we're going to fill the slot that we cut with the table saw with a piece of wood. I have a piece of purple hide I'm going to use for this. I've cut it to size and fit it, and now I'm going to glue it in. I'm going to make sure that it's flush on the back and flush on the inside of the cutout. Now we'll set the saw to the height of the mortise. Now we can clamp the piece in the mortising jig. And adjust the fence so that we can cut the inside cheek. Now we can cut the mortise, and after each pass we'll adjust the fence to make it wider. Then we'll stop and make a final adjustment so that we can cut the outside cheek. Now we'll cut a piece of purple heart to fit the mortise. Next we'll drill a 5/16 hole in the purple heart, and then we'll tap it to 3/8 of an inch. Now we'll tap this piece just as we did with the end of the shaft. Then we'll coat the threads with super glue, let it dry, and run the tap through one more time, just as before. Now we can glue the piece in, making sure that we get the hole centered. Now I can cut the tool holder to its final shape. First, I'll trim off the excess purple heart. Then I'll cut it to length. And finally, cut the sides. Afterwards, I'll sand it to the lines of the pattern. Then it can be finish sanded and coated with linseed oil. I've put the template on the piece, and you'll notice that the template has a round end now. That's because there was a mistake in the PDF, and we've corrected that. I'm going to drill a hole. I've got this clamped to a piece of scrap wood I'm using as a fence. I've got another piece of scrap wood underneath supporting it. Let's drill the hole now. Now we just need to shape this end and sand it and finish it, and it'll be done. All the parts have been sanded and finished, and here's the assembled jig. I've locked two 3/8 inch nuts here so the jig can rotate, but it can't slide back and forth. There's a 3/8 inch by 1 inch bolt here that locks the angle, and a 3/8 inch by 2 inch bolt here to hold the gouge. Commercial jigs have a mark here, as this one does, and a series of marks around the edge. That way you can consistently set the angle. That's because it would be too expensive to have multiple jigs. But this jig is cheap and easy to make. I'll keep this adjustable jig for the gouges and chisels I don't use much, but I'll make custom jigs for my favorite gouges. Here's a tool holder I've made for my favorite gouge. The gouge is a 1/2 inch gouge with a 1/2 inch shaft. This has a 1/2 inch hole for the gouge, and it has a threaded hole for this 3/8 inch bolt to hold it in place. I'm going to finish the rest of this jig, and when I get the angle set, I'm going to glue it and keep it in place permanently. Here's another gouge. To make a tool holder for this, we'd use the same technique as we did to make the adjustable jig, except we'd shape the bottom of the hole to fit the tool, just like this. By making custom shaped tool holders, we can make jigs to fit any gouge. I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. We'll be making more videos, so be sure to subscribe. If you have questions or suggestions, please leave a comment.